Detective Emily Carter embarks on a high-stakes mission to protect Laura Bennett and her son Ethan from Mason Drake, a ruthless crime boss leading a smuggling network. When Ethan becomes the target due to a hard drive his late father hid, containing damning evidence against the network, Emily risks everything to keep them safe. A daring rescue and intense firefight lead to Drake's capture. But the revelation of a larger shadowy figure, known only as Atlas, complicates the victory. As Emily dismantles Drake's empire, she faces the chilling reality of a retaliation plan targeting everyone involved in the investigation. The story ends with Laura and Ethan finding safety, while Emily prepares to confront the even more dangerous forces behind Atlas. What do you think about this story? Where are you watching from? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to DG Story for more thrilling and emotional stories like this one. The streets of Hudson Valley were calm that morning, bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun. Detective Emily Carter sipped her coffee, leaning against her patrol car parked near a bustling intersection. The city had its share of troubles, but moments like this, peaceful and quiet, reminded her why she had chosen to serve and protect. Her radio crackled, but before any call came through, she noticed a brown and white dog darting toward her. Its ears perked, tail wagging frantically, but its expression was far from playful. It stopped at her feet, barking sharply, its eyes locked on hers as if pleading for help. "What's wrong, buddy?" Emily crouched, her hand extended in reassurance. But instead of calming, the dog grabbed her pant leg with its teeth and tugged, pulling her toward the alleyway behind her. Instinct kicked in. Emily followed, one hand resting on her holstered weapon as the dog led her through the narrow path. As they rounded a corner, her breath caught. A small boy, no older than 10, was trapped beneath the collapsed frame of a rusted truck bed. He was pale, trembling, and his wide eyes darted around in fear. "Help!" he whispered weakly. Emily rushed to his side, assessing the situation. Hey, it's okay. I'm here. Let's get you out." The dog barked urgently, pacing near her as if sensing the urgency. Emily carefully lifted the frame, using every ounce of her strength to free the boy. He whimpered but didn't resist as she pulled him to safety. His small frame felt weightless in her arms, yet the terror in his eyes made her heart feel heavy. "What's your name?" Emily asked gently, placing him down on the curb. "Ethan," he stammered, clutching the dog's fur as it nuzzled him protectively. "They're coming. They're going to find me." Emily's brow furrowed. "Who's coming? Ethan? Are you hurt? Where's your family?" Before Ethan could answer, the faint hum of an engine drew her attention. A black SUV with tinted windows was idling at the far end of the alley. The windows were up, but she could feel the cold, calculating gaze of whoever sat inside. "Stay close," Emily instructed, her hand tightening around her holster. She turned back to Ethan. "We need to move." Grabbing her radio, she called for backup, but there was no time to wait. The SUV began inching closer, and Emily knew they had to leave, scooping Ethan into her arms. She glanced at the dog. "You're coming too, buddy. Let's go." The trio dashed through the alley, Emily leading them toward her patrol car parked nearby. She could hear the SUV picking up speed behind them. The sound of tires screeching against asphalt sent adrenaline coursing through her veins. As they reached the car, Emily yanked the door open and ushered Ethan and the dog inside. Sliding into the driver's seat, she started the engine and floored the gas pedal, speeding out of the alley just as the SUV rounded the corner. In the rearview mirror, she saw the vehicle give chase. Ethan clung to the dog, tears streaming down his face. "They won't stop," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Emily glanced at him through the mirror. "They'll have to go through me first." Her focus sharpened as she maneuvered through the streets, her mind racing with questions. Who was after this boy, and why? But one thing was clear. She had stumbled upon something much bigger than a simple rescue. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as the patrol car sped through the streets of Hudson Valley. The black SUV stayed on their tail, its engine growling like a predator closing in on its prey. In the back seat, Ethan trembled, holding onto the dog, Apollo, as if it were his lifeline. "Ethan," Emily called over her shoulder, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Do you know who's in that car? Why are they after you?" "They're bad men," Ethan whispered, his voice shaky. They hurt people. And they want." "What do they want?" Emily pressed, glancing at him briefly in the rearview mirror. Ethan hesitated, his small hands clutching Apollo's fur even tighter. "They think I have something my dad left behind." Emily's mind raced. Whatever it was, it must be important enough to warrant this level of pursuit. She shifted her focus back to the road, veering sharply around a corner, trying to lose the SUV. The sound of screeching tires echoed behind them as the vehicle struggled to keep up. Emily's radio crackled. "This is dispatch. Detective Carter. Do you need backup?" "Yes," Emily replied firmly, her eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. "I'm being pursued by a black SUV. Suspects are armed and dangerous. Current location: heading west on Maple Avenue." "Understood. Backup is en route." She took another sharp turn, pulling into a side street that led to an abandoned industrial zone. The SUV hesitated, slowing down at the intersection before speeding off in the opposite direction. Emily exhaled sharply. "All right, we're clear. For now." She parked the car near an old warehouse and turned to Ethan. "You're safe, but we need to figure out what's going on. Where's your mom? Does she know you're in trouble?" Ethan nodded quickly. She's hiding. She told me to run when they came to our house." Emily's jaw tightened. The situation was worse than she thought. "Do you have a phone? Can you call her?" "No phone," Ethan mumbled, shaking his head. "But she said we'd meet at the park near the river." Emily glanced at her watch. It was still early, but if these men had found Ethan, they could easily track down his mother too. She started the car again. "All right, let's get you to her." When they arrived at the park, it was eerily quiet. The rising sun cast long shadows across the empty benches and pathways. Emily scanned the area cautiously, her hand resting on her holster. "Mom!" Ethan suddenly shouted, jumping out of the car. Apollo followed closely as the boy ran toward a woman standing near the riverbank. Laura Bennett turned at the sound of her son's voice, relief flooding her face as she knelt to hug him tightly. "Oh, Ethan, thank God you're okay." Emily approached cautiously. "Mrs. Bennett?" Laura looked up, her expression a mix of gratitude and fear. "Yes. Are you the officer who helped Ethan?" Emily nodded. "Detective Emily Carter. Your son's safe, but we need to talk. He mentioned men chasing you. Can you tell me what's going on?" Laura's face paled. She glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. "It's complicated. My husband, he was involved with some dangerous people. After he passed, they started coming after us, saying we had something they wanted." "What exactly are they looking for?" Emily asked, her tone firm but understanding. Laura hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know exactly. My husband was secretive about his work, but before he died, he told me to protect Ethan no matter what. He said they'd stop at nothing to get what they wanted." Emily crossed her arms, her mind piecing together the fragments of the story. "Do you think Ethan might have something they're after? Maybe something your husband left behind?" I'm not sure," Laura admitted, her voice trembling. "But they think he does." Suddenly, the sound of an approaching car broke the tense silence. Emily turned, her hand immediately going to her gun. A black sedan pulled into the park, its windows tinted. It wasn't the SUV, but the air grew heavy with tension. "Stay behind me," Emily ordered, positioning herself between the family and the car. The sedan stopped, and two men stepped out. They were dressed in dark suits, their expressions cold and calculated. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, spoke first. "Detective Carter, we're not here to cause trouble." "Funny," Emily said dryly, her gun still drawn. "You've been chasing this kid all morning. What do you want?" The man smirked, his gaze shifting to Ethan. "We're just here for what belongs to us. Hand over the boy, and no one gets hurt." "Over my dead body," Emily snapped. The second man pulled out a phone and held it up. On the screen was a live video feed showing Laura's house, surrounded by more men in black. "We have other ways of getting what we want. Detective, don't make this harder than it has to be." Emily's stomach sank, but she didn't waver. "If you're threatening me, you better be ready for the consequences." The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, Paulo barked sharply, startling the men. Emily seized the moment, raising her weapon higher. "Get on the ground. Now!" The men hesitated, their hands hovering near their weapons. Before anything could escalate, sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the arrival of backup. The men exchanged a glance before retreating to their car. "This isn't over," the taller one said before they sped away. Emily lowered her gun, exhaling in relief. She turned to Laura and Ethan. "We need to get you somewhere safe. Now." Emily's patrol car sped down the main streets of Hudson Valley, weaving through traffic as the black SUV loomed in the rearview mirror. Her grip on the wheel tightened, her mind calculating every turn, every potential route to safety. Paulo, the dog, sat protectively next to Ethan. His ears perked and his eyes fixed on the boy as if sensing his fear. Ethan's small voice broke the tension. "Are they going to catch us?" Emily glanced at him through the mirror, her expression firm. "Not if I can help it." She turned sharply onto a side street, her tires squealing against the asphalt. The SUV followed. Relentless, Emily's training kicked in. She needed to lose them. Spotting an underpass leading to a busy downtown area, she veered onto it, merging with the traffic. The black SUV hesitated at the intersection before continuing its pursuit. Emily reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Detective Carter. I need backup at Maple and 5th. Possible hostile vehicle in pursuit." Static crackled in response, followed by a curt reply, "Backup en route. ETA 3 minutes. 3 minutes." Emily muttered under her breath, her eyes flicking to Ethan. "Just hold on, okay?" The boy nodded, clutching Apollo's fur like a lifeline. The dog let out a low growl, its gaze shifting toward the window as if it could sense the threat looming behind them. Emily's plan was simple: outmaneuver the pursuers and find a secure location to regroup. She spotted an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district, its rusted gate slightly ajar. Without hesitation, she pulled in, her car screeching to a halt behind a stack of shipping containers. She killed the engine and motioned for Ethan to stay quiet. The black SUV slowed as it approached the gate. Emily could see its shadow cast against the metal walls, growing larger as it inched closer. She reached for her gun, her instincts on high alert. Ethan whispered, "Are they going to come in?" Emily crouched near the car, her voice steady. "Not if we stay hidden. Stay low. Both of you." Paulo seemed to understand, lying flat next to Ethan and watching the entrance. The SUV idled for a moment before the sound of its tires faded into the distance. Emily exhaled, her heart pounding. After ensuring the coast was clear, Emily guided Ethan and Apollo into the warehouse. The space was cold and dimly lit, its walls lined with dusty shelves and forgotten machinery. Emily scanned the area, her mind racing for their next move. Ethan sat down on a stack of crates, still clutching Apollo. "Why are they after me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Emily knelt in front of him. "That's what I'm going to figure out, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Ethan hesitated before nodding. "Okay." Moments later, a loud knock echoed through the warehouse door. Emily's hand flew to her holster as she called out, "Who's there?" A familiar voice answered. "Laura Bennett. I'm Ethan's mother." Emily hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "How did you find us?" The door creaked open, revealing a woman in her mid-30s, her face pale with worry. Laura Bennett stepped inside, holding her phone. "The GPS tracker on Ethan's backpack," she explained quickly. "I had to find him." "Are you Detective Carter?" Emily nodded, her guard still up. "And you brought no one else?" Laura shook her head. "No one. Please, I just want to protect my son." Ethan's face lit up at the sight of his mother. "Mom!" He ran to her, burying his face in her arms. Apollo wagged his tail slightly before sitting back on his haunches. Laura looked at Emily, desperation in her eyes. "I know what this is about. Detective, my husband, he left us with something dangerous, and now they're after Ethan because of it." Emily's gaze hardened. "What exactly did he leave?" Laura's voice faltered. "A drive. A hard drive with all their operations, transactions, names, locations. He told me never to touch it, but I think it's the reason they killed him." Emily felt the weight of the revelation. "Do you still have it?" Laura shook her head. "It's hidden in our old house, but they're watching everything. I don't know how we can get it without being caught." Emily straightened. Determination etched across her face. "We'll figure it out. But first, we need to move. This place isn't safe." As they planned their next steps, Emily's radio buzzed. "Detective Carter, this is Officer Hayes. Backup is in position. What's your status?" Emily relayed their location, feeling a sliver of relief. Minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up outside. Officer Hayes stepped out, his expression calm as he approached. But something felt off. Apollo growled low in his throat, his fur bristling as Hayes entered the warehouse. Emily's instincts flared. "Hayes, what are you doing here?" Hayes hesitated, then smirked, ensuring the job gets done. Before Emily could react, Hayes drew his weapon, aiming it at Laura and Ethan. "Hand over the boy, Carter. You don't know what you're messing with." Emily's hand flew to her holster as she positioned herself between Hayes and the family. "You've got 2 seconds to lower that gun." Hayes laughed coldly. "Do you really think you can stop this? Mason Drake owns half the force. You're outnumbered." The tension was palpable. Emily's mind raced as she calculated her next move. Apollo suddenly lunged, snapping at Hayes's leg. The officer stumbled, firing a shot that ricocheted off a metal beam. Emily seized the moment, disarming Hayes and pinning him to the ground. "You're under arrest," she hissed, securing his hands with cuffs. Turning to Laura, she said, "We need to leave. Now." As sirens wailed in the distance, Emily led Laura, Ethan, and Apollo out the back exit. The betrayal confirmed what Emily had suspected all along. This was bigger than she imagined. And Mason Drake wasn't just after Ethan. He had infiltrated the very system meant to stop him. The safe house Emily had arranged was a modest cabin on the outskirts of Hudson Valley, surrounded by dense woods. It was far enough from the city to buy them some time, but the atmosphere inside was heavy with tension. Laura paced nervously while Ethan sat by the window, Apollo at his side, his loyal gaze scanning the forest outside. Emily stood at the dining table, her phone pressed to her ear. "Captain, we have a problem. Hayes was working for them. If there's one mole in the department, there could be more." A sigh came through the line. "That's concerning. Stick to the safe house for now. We're vetting the team, but trust no one until we know more." Emily hung up and turned to Laura. "We can't trust anyone outside this cabin. If Hayes was on their payroll, there's no telling how deep this goes." Laura, visibly shaken, sank into a chair. "It's my fault," she murmured, her hands trembling. "I knew my husband, Ryan, was involved in something dangerous, but I didn't ask questions. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away." Emily sat across from her, her tone firm but compassionate. "What exactly did Ryan tell you?" Laura hesitated, then began to speak. Ryan worked for Mason Drake. First, it was small things, logistics, moving goods. He thought he could get out before it got too serious. But then he stumbled upon information he wasn't supposed to see. A hard drive. Ryan said it had records of every transaction, every name in Drake's operation. He planned to use it as leverage to get out. But Drake found out, and Ryan didn't make it. Laura's voice cracked, and Ethan looked up from the window, his eyes wide. Dad wasn't a bad person, was he? He asked softly. Laura wiped a tear from her cheek. No, sweetheart. He made bad choices, but he loved us. Everything he did was to protect us. Emily leaned back, her mind racing. If Drake knew about the drive, why go after Ethan now? Laura took a deep breath. Because Ethan saw where Ryan hid it. He doesn't remember exactly, but Drake's men think they can scare him into talking. Emily tapped the table, her resolve hardening. We can't keep running. If that drive exists, it's our best chance to take Drake down. Where is it? Laura hesitated. Our old house, in the basement, behind a false wall. But the house has new owners. We sold it after Ryan passed. Emily nodded. Then we need a plan. First, we'll scope out the house and confirm the drive is still there. After that, we'll coordinate with the department to move on Drake. Laura's eyes widened. You're walking into a trap. He'll be watching. Emily's lips curved into a determined smirk. Let him, if he's watching us. He's not watching his own back. As night fell, Emily stepped outside to check the perimeter, leaving Laura and Ethan alone. Ethan sat on the couch, Apollo resting his head on the boy's lap. The silence between them was heavy until Ethan finally spoke. Why didn't you tell me about Dad? He asked, his voice trembling. Laura looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. I wanted to protect you, Ethan. I didn't want you to know what he was involved in. I just wanted you to have a normal life. But they're after us now because of him, Ethan said, his voice rising. It's his fault we're here. Laura knelt in front of him, placing her hands on his shoulders. Your father wasn't perfect, but he loved you more than anything. And right now, we need to be brave. We need to trust Detective Carter and Apollo. We'll get through this. I promise. Ethan's lip quivered, but he nodded, leaning into his mother's embrace. Apollo let out a soft whine, his tail thumping gently against the floor. Outside, Emily's sharp instincts picked up something unusual. The faint crunch of leaves echoed in the still night air. Her hand instinctively went to her holster as she scanned the tree line. Apollo, sensing her unease, stood up, his ears perked. Emily called softly over her shoulder. Stay inside. Lock the doors. She moved cautiously toward the edge of the woods, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam landed on a footprint, fresh and leading deeper into the trees. Emily followed, her weapon drawn, every nerve in her body on edge. Suddenly, her radio crackled. Detective Carter, come in. It was Officer Ramirez, one of the few she still trusted. Go ahead, she whispered, keeping her voice low. We've got intel. Drake's men are moving. They're testing the safe house perimeter. Reinforcements are on the way. Emily cursed under her breath. Understood. I've got movement here. ETA on backup. 10 minutes. Ramirez replied. Emily turned back toward the cabin, her pace quickening. But as she approached, she froze. The faint glow of a flashlight danced through the windows of the cabin. Someone was already inside. Emily burst through the door, her gun raised. A masked figure had Laura cornered, while another stood near Ethan, his weapon trained on the boy. Apollo growled fiercely, his stance low and ready to attack. Drop it, Emily commanded, her voice sharp. The intruder near Laura turned, raising his gun. In a split-second decision, Emily fired, the shot echoing through the small cabin. The man crumpled to the ground, and Apollo lunged at the second intruder, knocking him off balance. Run, Emily shouted to Laura and Ethan. Laura grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward the back door. Apollo held the remaining intruder at bay as Emily cuffed him. She dragged him to his feet, her eyes blazing. "How many of you are out there?" The man smirked through his mask. "Enough." Before Emily could respond, the sound of tires screeching outside made her blood run cold. Backup was still minutes away, and Drake's men were closing in. The screech of tires outside the cabin sent a jolt through Emily as she pressed the intruder against the wall. Her grip firm. Through the small window, headlights pierced the darkness, followed by the sound of car doors slamming shut. Backup was still minutes away, and Drake's men weren't waiting. Emily grabbed her radio. "Ramirez, how far are you?" His voice crackled in response. 2 minutes out. Carter, hold your position. Make it 1. Emily snapped, her gaze flicking to Laura and Ethan, who were crouched behind the couch. Apollo stood in front of them, his growl low and menacing. Emily turned to the intruder she had cuffed. "How many outside? Talk." The man chuckled. "Enough to make this your last stand." Emily didn't hesitate. She shoved him into a storage closet. Locking the door, she turned back to Laura and Ethan, her voice firm. "Stay low. Don't move unless I tell you." The first gunshot shattered the night, the sound reverberating through the cabin. Emily dove to the ground, pulling Laura and Ethan with her as bullets tore through the windows. Apollo barked furiously, his body tensed as he stayed protectively in front of Ethan. Emily crawled to the nearest window, peeking out. Shadows moved in the woods, at least 5 figures closing in, their rifles glinting under the moonlight. "We're outnumbered," Laura whispered, her voice trembling. "Not outsmarted," Emily replied, her mind racing. She grabbed a flashlight from her belt and threw it toward the window. The beam flickered as it hit the ground outside, momentarily drawing the attacker's fire. Using the distraction, Emily fired 2 shots, hitting one of the figures who collapsed with a yell. "They're trying to flank us," Emily muttered. Moving to the opposite side of the cabin, she fired again, narrowly missing another attacker. As the attackers drew closer, Apollo bolted toward the door, barking wildly. "Apollo, no!" Ethan cried, reaching for the dog, but Emily stopped him. Apollo leapt at the first intruder who burst through the doorway, his powerful jaws locking onto the man's arm. The intruder screamed, struggling to shake the dog off, but Apollo held firm. Emily took the opportunity to disarm the man, landing a solid blow that knocked him unconscious. More gunfire erupted, forcing Emily to retreat toward Laura and Ethan. "We need to move," she said, her voice sharp. "They're pinning us down." "But where?" Laura asked, panic in her voice. Emily gestured toward the back door. "There's a path through the woods. It'll lead us to the main road. Ramirez is almost here." Emily led the way, her weapon drawn, with Laura and Ethan close behind. Apollo limped slightly but stayed alert, growling at the sounds of movement in the trees. They sprinted through the dark woods, the beam of Emily's flashlight guiding their path. The attackers weren't far behind. Bullets whizzed past them, splintering tree trunks and kicking up dirt. Emily turned and fired, hitting another pursuer, but the remaining men were relentless. As they reached the edge of the woods, the sound of sirens cut through the chaos. Red and blue lights flickered in the distance, and Emily felt a surge of relief. Ramirez and his team had arrived. "Down here," Emily shouted, waving her flashlight. The police cars skidded to a halt, officers spilling out and taking cover as they returned fire. The attackers, realizing they were outgunned, began to retreat. Ramirez approached Emily, his rifle raised. "You okay?" "Mostly," Emily replied, glancing at Laura and Ethan, who were shaken but unharmed. "Thanks for showing up." Apollo let out a low whine, and Ethan knelt beside him, tears in his eyes. "He's hurt." Emily crouched down, inspecting the dog's side. There was a graze along his ribs, but nothing life-threatening. "He'll be okay," she assured Ethan. "He's tough, just like you." As the scene calmed, Ramirez approached Emily with a grim expression. "We caught one of them alive," he said. "You'll want to hear this." Emily followed him to a squad car, where an injured attacker sat in the back seat, his hands cuffed. She leaned in, her voice cold. "Who sent you?" The man sneered but winced in pain. "You know who. Mason Drake doesn't like loose ends." Emily narrowed her eyes. "If you're smart, you'll tell me where he is." The man chuckled darkly. "You think this ends with Drake? He's just the frontman. There's someone bigger pulling the strings." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "Who?" The man's smirk widened. "You'll find out, if you live long enough." Back at the precinct, Emily sat with Laura and Ethan in a secure room. Ramirez stood nearby, watching over them as Emily explained the situation. "Mason Drake isn't just running a smuggling ring," Emily began. "He's part of something much larger. The hard drive your husband hid. It might hold the key to unraveling all of it." Laura looked pale. "So what do we do now?" Emily's jaw tightened. "We get that drive, but we'll need to be smart. Drake knows we're coming." Laura hesitated, then nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." Emily placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've done enough. Let me handle this." Emily and Ramirez devised a plan to retrieve the drive and lure Mason Drake into the open, while Laura and Ethan were moved to a more secure location. Emily prepared her team for a high-risk operation. "We'll draw him out," Emily explained during the briefing. "Drake thinks he's untouchable, but he has weaknesses. He'll want to tie up loose ends. That's when we'll strike." Ramirez nodded. "And the drive?" Emily's expression hardened. "It's the leverage we need to bring his whole operation down." As the team suited up, Emily glanced at a photo of Laura and Ethan on her phone. This wasn't just another case. It was personal, and she was determined to see it through to the end. Emily adjusted the strap of her tactical vest, the weight of the operation settling on her shoulders as the team prepared to move out. The plan was clear. Secure the hard drive from Laura's old house and use it to lure Mason Drake into the open. But Emily knew this was no simple retrieval mission. Drake would be waiting. "Team Alpha," Emily called out to Ramirez and 3 officers. "You're with me. We'll secure the house and get the drive." "Team Bravo, secure the perimeter. No one in or out without my command." "Yes, ma'am," Ramirez replied, his voice steady. As they loaded into the convoy of black SUVs, Emily glanced at Laura, who was sitting with Ethan in the safe house. "We'll get it done," she said, her voice firm. Laura nodded, clutching Ethan's hand. The convoy arrived at the Bennett's old house just before midnight. The 2-story home sat eerily quiet at the end of a cul-de-sac, its windows dark and curtains drawn. The new owners were gone, relocated after Emily had arranged temporary housing to avoid any collateral damage. Emily and her team moved swiftly, their boots crunching against the gravel driveway. She gestured toward Ramirez. "Take Bravo around the back. Watch for any movement." "Got it," he replied, signaling for his team to fan out. Inside the house, Emily's flashlight cut through the darkness. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew lingered. The basement door loomed ahead, this wooden frame warped with age. "Stay sharp," Emily whispered to her team, leading the way down the creaking stairs. The basement was cramped and cold, its walls lined with old shelves stacked with forgotten belongings. Emily's eyes scanned the space, her memory piecing together Laura's description. Behind a stack of storage bins, she found it, a false wall, slightly uneven against the concrete. "Here," she called out, motioning for Ramirez to help. Together, they pried the panel loose, revealing a small metal lockbox nestled in a hollowed-out space. Emily's heart raced as she inspected the box. It was sturdy, with a combination lock securing its contents. "This has to be it," she muttered. Turning to Ramirez, she added, "Get it back to the van. I'll secure the area." Just as Emily and her team began to exit the basement, a deafening explosion rocked the house, shattering windows and knocking them off balance. Emily hit the floor, her ears ringing as smoke filled the room. "They're here," Ramirez shouted, scrambling to his feet. Gunfire erupted outside, and Emily's radio crackled to life. "Bravo to Alpha. Multiple hostiles engaging at the perimeter. We're pinned down," Emily cursed under her breath, her grip tightening on her weapon. "Ramirez, get the lockbox to safety. I'll cover you." "Not a chance, Carter." He shot back. "We're getting out together." As they reached the main floor, the front door burst open, and 3 armed men stormed inside. Emily reacted instantly, firing 2 precise shots that dropped the first attacker. Ramirez tackled another, while the third ducked behind cover, returning fire. "Move! Move!" Emily shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The team fought their way outside, where Team Bravo was engaged in a fierce firefight with Drake's men. The attackers were relentless, their bullets tearing through the night as they pressed closer. Emily spotted a figure standing near a black SUV at the edge of the street. Even from a distance, she recognized him, Mason Drake. His tall frame was illuminated by the flickering flames of a nearby vehicle, his expression cold and calculating. "This is it," Emily muttered, raising her weapon. But before she could get a clear shot, Drake stepped back into the SUV, the vehicle speeding away into the night. With Drake gone, Emily and her team focused on neutralizing the remaining attackers. The firefight lasted several more minutes before the last of the men surrendered or fled. The scene was a mess of broken glass, spent shell casings, and smoldering debris. Ramirez approached Emily, the lockbox still clutched in his hands. "We got it, but this isn't over." Emily nodded, her gaze hard. "No, it's not, but we've got what we need." Back at the precinct, the tech team worked quickly to crack the lockbox. Inside, they found the hard drive, along with several encrypted documents and a small notebook filled with codes and names. As Emily reviewed the contents, her stomach dropped. The files revealed not only the scope of Drake's operation, but also something far more sinister: a list of law enforcement officers, politicians, and business leaders on his payroll. "This is bigger than I thought," Emily said, her voice grim. "If Drake's got this kind of reach, taking him down won't just be about him. It'll be about everyone protecting him." Ramirez frowned. "And they won't go quietly." Just as Emily began to piece together a strategy, her phone buzzed, a video message. She hesitated before pressing play, her blood running cold at what she saw. The screen showed Laura and Ethan, tied to chairs in a dimly lit room. Mason Drake's voice filled the silence. "You've been busy, Detective Carter, but while you were chasing shadows, I found something more valuable than a hard drive." The video cut off abruptly, leaving Emily staring at the screen, her heart pounding. She clenched her fists, her jaw tightening with fury. "He has them," she said, her voice shaking. "We're going after him. Now." Emily's heart raced as the video replayed in her mind. Laura and Ethan, bound and helpless, with Mason Drake's cold voice taunting her. She stood in the operations room, the hard drive and documents spread across the table. Her team waited for orders, their expressions grim. "We don't have time to wait," Emily said, her voice sharp. "Drake's got them, and we're moving now." Ramirez crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. "Do we know where he's holding them?" Emily pointed to the map. One of the locations listed on the hard drive, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. "It's heavily secured, but this is our best shot." A younger officer hesitated. "What if it's a trap?" Emily's gaze hardened. "It probably is, but we don't have a choice." As the team loaded their gear into the convoy, Emily reviewed the plan one last time. Team Alpha will breach the main entrance. Team Bravo will secure the perimeter and cut off any escape routes. We go in fast, and we go in quiet. The priority is getting Laura and Ethan out alive. Ramirez nodded. "And Drake?" Emily's jaw tightened. "I want him alive. We're ending this." The drive to the warehouse was tense. Emily sat in the lead vehicle, gripping the edge of her seat as the city lights gave way to the industrial shadows. She glanced at her phone, the image of Laura and Ethan flashing through her mind. "We're coming," she whispered. The warehouse loomed ahead, its corrugated metal walls illuminated by harsh floodlights. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Emily signaled for the convoy to stop just out of sight. "Bravo, take the west side. Alpha, with me," she whispered into her radio. The team moved into position, their footsteps muffled against the gravel. Emily and Ramirez approached the main entrance, their weapons drawn. A guard stood just inside, unaware of their presence. With a nod, Ramirez moved first, taking the guard down silently. Emily followed, her heart pounding as they entered the building. The interior was a maze of crates and machinery, the air thick with the scent of oil and metal. Emily's flashlight cut through the dim light, revealing scattered papers and equipment. The sound of voices echoed from deeper within the warehouse. "They're close," Ramirez murmured. Emily held up a hand, signaling the team to pause. She moved toward the source of the voices, her steps deliberate and silent. As they rounded a corner, her heart sank. Laura and Ethan were tied to chairs in the center of the room, their faces pale and terrified. Mason Drake stood behind them, flanked by two armed men. He was calm, almost smug, his hands clasped behind his back. Well, Drake drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Detective Carter, right on time." Emily stepped into the light, her weapon trained on Drake. "Let them go." Drake smirked. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, but I'll give you credit. You're persistent. Too bad it ends here." He gestured to his men, who raised their weapons. Emily's finger hovered over the trigger, her mind racing. She couldn't risk a shootout with Laura and Ethan so close. "What do you want, Drake?" Emily demanded, stalling for time. Drake laughed. "What I've always wanted, control. But you've made that difficult, haven't you? So now, I want you to make a choice. Surrender yourself, your badge, your morals, or watch them pay the price." Emily's grip on her gun tightened. She glanced at Ramirez, who was positioned out of sight with the rest of the team. With a subtle nod, she signaled him to move. "Drake," Emily said, keeping his attention on her. "You think you've won, but you haven't. This ends tonight." Drake tilted his head, amused. Bold words for someone outnumbered. Before he could say more, the room erupted in chaos. A flashbang grenade detonated, blinding the guards as Team Bravo stormed in. Emily charged forward, taking down one of Drake's men with a single shot. Ramirez moved to untie Laura and Ethan, shielding them as gunfire rang out. "Stay down," he shouted. Drake attempted to flee, but Emily intercepted him, slamming him against a crate. "It's over," she growled, cuffing his hands behind his back. Drake sneered. "You think this changes anything? I'm just a cog in the machine." Emily's jaw clenched. "We'll see about that." As the dust settled, Laura and Ethan were escorted to safety. Paulo, who had been kept in the convoy, ran to Ethan, nuzzling him with a soft whine. Ethan clung to the dog, tears streaming down his face. Emily stood over Drake, her expression unreadable. "You're going away for a long time." Drake smirked. "You'll regret this. There's always someone bigger." Back at the precinct, the tech team decrypted the remaining files on the hard drive. The documents revealed the full extent of Drake's network. Names, transactions, and locations of his accomplices. But one file stood out: Reclamation Protocol. Emily's stomach sank as she read it. The plan detailed a contingency to target law enforcement, witnesses, and their families if the operation was ever compromised. "This isn't over," Emily murmured. Ramirez approached, his face grim. "What now?" Emily's gaze hardened. "We keep fighting. For Laura, for Ethan, for everyone they've hurt." The precinct buzzed with activity as Emily leaned over the operations table. The decrypted files from the hard drive spread out before her. The sheer scale of Mason Drake's network was staggering. Smuggling operations across multiple states, corrupt officials on the payroll, and encrypted offshore accounts. It was the kind of case that could take years to dismantle. But it was the reclamation protocol that held her focus. The file detailed a calculated plan to retaliate against law enforcement, witnesses, and anyone who disrupted the network. Names were listed: hers, Ramirez's, and worst of all, Laura and Ethan's. Emily's grip tightened around the edge of the table. This isn't just about shutting them down anymore. They're targeting everyone who stood in their way. In a secured room at the precinct, Laura and Ethan sat quietly. Ethan clung to Apollo, who lay protectively at his feet. The boy's face was pale, his eyes still wide with the fear of what they had endured. Laura stroked his hair absent-mindedly, her own face drawn with exhaustion. Emily entered, her presence commanding yet calm. "How are you holding up?" Laura managed a weak smile. "I don't know. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Emily pulled up a chair and sat across from them. "You don't have to think about that. You're safe now. We've got Drake in custody, and we're dismantling his network." "But for how long?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. "That file, the one with our names on it. What if they come for us again?" Emily reached out, placing a firm hand on Laura's. "They'll have to go through me first." Mason Drake sat in the interrogation room, his usual smug demeanor intact despite his restraints. Emily entered, her expression cold and unyielding as she dropped the decrypted file on the table in front of him. "You planned for this," she said, her voice steady. "The reclamation protocol, it's your way of keeping control, even from behind bars." Drake smirked. "Control is everything, detective, and you should know by now. Cutting me down won't stop the rest. There's always someone ready to take my place." Emily leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "Then give me names. Tell me who's pulling the strings." Drake's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly regained his composure. "Even if I did, do you really think you can stop them? They're bigger than you, bigger than this city." Emily straightened, her resolve hardening. "Maybe, but I'll tear down every piece of this operation until there's nothing left for them to rebuild." Later that evening, Emily sat with Ramirez in the operations room, reviewing the data they had recovered. One name kept recurring throughout the files: Atlas. "Who's Atlas?" Ramirez asked, his brow furrowed. Emily tapped the screen. "According to these records, Atlas is the financial architect behind the network. They manage the money, coordinate the bribes, and keep everything running smoothly. And we have no idea who they are?" "Not yet," Emily admitted, "but we know where they operate." She pointed to a map. "A shipping hub in Florida. It's a start." Ramirez leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This never ends, does it?" Emily shook her head. "No, but we knew that when we signed up." In the days following Drake's arrest, Laura and Ethan were relocated to a new safe house in another state. It was a quiet, unassuming place where they could begin to rebuild their lives. Emily accompanied them to the airport, walking with them to the gate. Ethan held Apollo's leash tightly, the dog wagging his tail as they approached the terminal. "Do we have to go?" Ethan asked, looking up at Emily. Emily crouched to his level, smiling softly. "Just for a little while. You and your mom need a fresh start, but you'll always have people looking out for you." Ethan hugged her tightly, his small frame trembling. "Thank you for saving us." Emily ruffled his hair, her throat tightening. "You're a brave kid, Ethan. Don't ever forget that." Laura stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You risked everything for us." Emily shook her head. "Just take care of him. That's all the thanks I need." As the plane took off, Emily stood at the terminal window, watching it disappear into the horizon. Ramirez approached, his hands in his pockets. "You okay?" he asked. Emily nodded. "They're safe. That's all that matters." But Drake's operation isn't finished, Ramirez said cautiously. And now we've got Atlas to worry about. Emily turned to face him, her expression resolute. One step at a time. We'll find them. We'll finish this. In a dimly lit office halfway across the country, a figure sat behind a desk, scrolling through news reports on Mason Drake's arrest. The headlines flashed across the screen. Crime boss taken down in major sting operation. The figure's face remained obscured, but their voice was cold and calculating as they spoke into a phone. Drake was sloppy. It's time to clean up the mess. Activate reclamation protocol. On the other end of the line, a voice responded. Understood, Atlas. Consider it done. The screen went dark, leaving the room in silence.